Buenas, disculpen, antes de empezar, ¿alguien ha visto algunos audífonos por sus asientos? ¿No? Muchas gracias. Tardes. Y repetirles una vez más la bienvenida. Gracias por su asistencia a este segundo día del Congreso Internacional de Educadores. A continuación se dará la conferencia titulada Bienestar Docente, a cargo del ponente Matthew Allen, quien es director académico de inglés en la Universidad Peruana de Ciencias Aplicadas. Dr. Matthew Allen es un educador y escritor canadiense. Cuenta con 30 años de experiencia como docente de inglés, literatura inglesa y teoría del conocimiento en países de América del Norte, Centro y Sur. Además de docente, ha sido coordinador y director del programa de bachillerato internacional en colegios bilingües y universidades en Perú y Costa Rica. Antes de iniciar, cabe mencionar que durante la conferencia estaremos alumnos de apoyo, quienes podemos asistirlos a ustedes, tanto como el ponente. Muchas gracias y pido unos aplausos para dar una bienvenida a nuestro ponente, por favor.
Yeah, sorry. I don't want to give you the impression that the wrong impression because I'm up on the stage, because really I am one of you. And this presentation today is all about you. And so all I ask is that you spend some time with me and reflect and think about how might look after yourself so you can look after your students better. I would ask you not to use your cell phones unless you want to take pictures of the screen, which is fine, because I want you really to be present with me in this moment. So, where to begin? Well, I'll begin with myself. I'm a Canadian. But I'm half Peruvian because I married a beautiful Peruvian lady, as all smart gringos do. So I've been here in Lima for the last 5 years or so, and I'm sort of between cultures and between languages. I wish I could give you this address in Spanish, but mi español is más o menos. However, we're all teachers, we're all educators, and that is our connection, especially for today. I'm going to begin by asking a question, which is, do you see anything wrong with this picture? In one way is a beautiful idea, no? And it's true because we are the light of the world. You are the light of the world. You provide inspiration and enlightenment to your students. I think perhaps after being a mother, being a teacher is the most important profession in the world. We'll come back to that. But you should be proud to be educators. And this is telling you that but it's also giving you a mixed message. See any problem? Yeah? Hey.
Right? So I consider that, okay, we are teachers and we want, uh, better things for our students, but what about ourselves? So we are human beings and we don't need to consume ourselves. So, and I consider that there are a kind of strategies to avoid this kind of situation, right?
Exactly. Thank you. You got an A. Yeah, this is the whole thing. It's a beautiful thing to expend ourselves for our students, but for some reason, educators are not so good at looking after themselves. I should say me, because I struggle with the same thing. Every educator does. Here is the abstract. This is very intellectual in the sense that it's very abstract, but you can see just from looking at it quickly that burnout is pervasive. All the research indicates that, and that some of the causes are quite ironic. We'll look at that a little bit. There are some strategies, both institutional and individual, which can help and reduce burnout, if you like. But the future, where I think education should go, where I think leadership should go, where I think we should go, is not the negative, which is repairing burnout, but actually reaching towards wellness. Here's what I'm going to talk about today. First of all, my own story, because I actually started thinking seriously about burnout when I got burnt out. And I've been burnt out once, I would say moderately. That wasn't so difficult because I got married, I went to Costa Rica, I had a year in the sun, and I felt a lot better. The second time was more difficult, and it probably took me 6 months to recover. But I wrote the book in that 6 months that I wish someone had written for me 30 years ago. I'll tell you more about that later. We'll take a quick look at the research, and the research indicates that we're all at risk. Probably 30 to 40% of our colleagues, including ourselves, are at pretty serious risk of burnout. Some of the causes are in our hands, some are just general in our society. Excuse me. The question for us as educators, since we're used to measuring everything, is how do we assess our level of risk? How do we assess our level of risk? How do you know when you're starting to get burned out? And one of the tools that I'll share with you is the Wheel of Life. One way we have of assessing our wellness more than our level of burnout, but it assumes a kind of balance, or it could look like balance, which means that perhaps we should consider this whole idea of balance a bit further. And that itself is not simple, because some studies indicate that one of the stressors for educators and other people is trying to find a balance between work and life. So even finding balance in some ways can be stressful. But that depends on how you think about balance. So let's think about balance together. Then I'm going to give you some simple suggestions retired teachers. And I have developed these over the years myself or stolen them from other people, and they're really common sense. The only mystery to me is why we don't do it. Because we actually do know what to do, but the strange thing is, why don't we do what we know we should? Finally, I'm just going to have a blink at the future, which would be to find a more sustainable way of working and being. So who we are as well as what we do, and to have that led somehow by the people who lead our organizations. So here's my story. And it's an interesting one in the sense that somebody told me something 30 years ago that I still remembered 25 years ago, or sorry, 5 years ago when I wrote this book. So I began, can you hear me well? I began my career in teaching in a boarding school, all boys, all boarding. That was certainly a trial by fire if ever there was one, but it was also great. It was a great environment in which to learn how to teach. I felt a deep sense of vocation right away. Like many people, I kind of blundered into education, but once I was there, I found a calling, really a calling. And to connect with the kids was a great experience. You knew right away when you didn't, because they were 15 years old, so they would let you know very quickly if they weren't interested. On the other hand, if they were interested, you would also know right away. Now, in a boarding school, things are very concentrated. Our normal work week was actually about 60 hours because we, of course, lived there, but we taught half a day on Saturday. We did outdoor activities that were of a great adventure nature. On the weekends, we might find ourselves going on a 40-kilometer march with the boys, snow or no snow, because it's Canada after all. What amazed me was how they bounced back. You would go on a march with the boys, a hike if you like, and everybody would be exhausted, but you'd come back to the school and the boys would hit the showers, and then an hour later they would be out on the ice rink playing hockey, having fun, throwing each other around. It was the teachers who were at risk here. And the school nurse could see that. The boys would get predictable things, sometimes not predictable things, but normally they would be predictable, such as flus and colds, okay? Nothing surprising about that. One time I remember a kid knocked himself out by hitting himself with his skateboard off his bunk. That was a bit unusual. But nothing you couldn't expect from teenagers, I suppose. Occasional broken bones. She got pretty good at diagnosing them. But she realized that the teachers were really the ones at risk because they didn't bounce back. We were older. And so she arranged wisely for Dr. Art Burgess from the University of Alberta in Edmonton, Canada, to come and talk to us. And he was a wonderful man. He spent his whole life studying lifestyle and how lifestyle changes could affect people's longevity, their health, and also their productivity, and of course their performance in sports. And he was a lovely man. I remember him coming to the school, and we're sitting around much as you are now, and he talked to us about health and nutrition and so on and so on. Gave us a lot of good advice, and I'm sure he knew that we wouldn't take it, but we gave it anyway. God bless him. don't eat so much, don't drink so much, probably smoking isn't good for you, do something to manage your stress, all these things. And then there was a moment, and I remember this moment 30 years later as if it was yesterday. In the middle of his talk, he paused. Almost as if he was talking to himself, because I think it was just a reflection. He said, I've talked to hundreds of professional groups over my professional career. I've talked to every single kind of professional, doctors, lawyers, dentists, accountants, whatever. Teachers are the worst at looking after themselves. Said, I don't know why that is. I don't know why that is. And he said, I think it has something to do with the nature of the work, because they're willing to pour themselves out for their students. Absolutely. Nothing is enough for their students, but they don't think about themselves. So there is something about us as a profession which makes us particularly susceptible to burnout, because we do have that kind of attitude. We'll give everything for our students, but we just don't think about ourselves so much. And maybe that's a noble thing, but it's also a dangerous thing. So more about that in a minute. So I did write this book, and you can see it on Amazon if you wanted to, but that's not really the point. The point is my story and Art Burgess' advice. Okay? But I tell my story. Burnout is something which we can manage. Now, what am I talking about when I say burnout? Here's an extract from a psychological paper from Cattolica, and burnout is defined as emotional, mental, and physical exhaustion caused by prolonged stress. So everybody has hard days. The problem with teaching is that we have one hard day after another. So the stress can accumulate and accumulate and accumulate. If you get to the point where you're dragging yourself home, where you are emotionally, mentally, and physically exhausted, you should think about that. I should think about that because I leave my house at 6:30 and I get back to my house at about 6 o'clock and I'm exhausted. I'm too tired to talk to my wife or to say, even though she wants eagerly to talk to me about her day. I just want to have a little rest and be left alone. That's sad. But I'm not completely gone yet because at least I have some empathy. You notice that one of the things is that burnout leads to absenteeism, people missing work, and that's a big concern in many venues, but also impaired empathy, cynical attitudes, thoughts of quitting. There is somebody in your staff room, and I hope it's not you, who says, this school is just not run properly, or this university is just crazy, or these kids, they're just monsters. They just will never learn. They won't shut up. Blah, 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 blah. All of which could be true. But if we find ourselves thinking in this way all the time, And if we start thinking about quitting, there could be something wrong. So here are the numbers. And some of this data goes back a little while, so I checked it to make sure that it was current. The first statistic comes from the United States, and there's a National Center for Educational Statistics, which is attached to the educational ministry. And they're talking about 30 to 40% of teachers being disheartened with the profession. So 1 in 3 teachers is just kind of fed up and in some ways heartbroken, and more about that later. And severe problems with retention. You know, it's notorious that in the first 5 years of teaching, probably a third of the young teachers will leave the profession, sometimes a half. So let's go to the Britain. Here we have the British Teaching Union, and it's saying that there's such overwhelming experience among educators that burnout has been called the teacher's disease. Yikes. That's not how we want to be known as a profession. Here's the British Columbia, that is Canada, Teaching Federation, which is saying that there is such a drain on teachers, partly because they're sacrificing themselves. Again, you see the pattern here. They're sacrificing their own physical and mental health and their relationships for their students. And it's an unsustainable imbalance, which makes me think we need to find balance. But what does that look like? Then we have something which, in a dark way, one of the things I love about Peru is humor oscuro, is that the head teachers, the people, principals of the school, may even be worse off than the teachers, even though they don't show it, especially in the UK. So here's a terrible thing, okay? 1 out of 3 head teachers or headmasters were medicated for stress. 1 in 4 reported stress-related health problems. Over half claimed their family life suffered. 1 in 6 said they were alcoholics. Wow. I guess the problem, the immediate problem there is simply that if you go to your head of school and ask for help because you feel burnt out, he may be worse off or she may be worse off. Now, I thought, okay, that's schools. I know, we all know schools are hard. They're bloody hard. Dealing with kids is unbelievably difficult. The average classroom teacher has to make hundreds, literally hundreds of decisions every day in terms of classroom management. And, you know, we're responsible for discipline as well as performance. We're responsible for everything that has to do with our students. But at least it must be better in the universities, because there, frankly, you don't have to worry about the kids. You just have to worry about giving your lectures, right? If they want to study, that's fine. If they don't, who cares? Sorry, it's not like that. So imagine this. Here's an analysis of 12 peer-reviewed journals. United States, Britain, Canada, South Africa, Spain, Turkey, the Netherlands, and the levels of burnout are about the same as those of school teachers and health professionals. You'll often hear, with justification, that the level of burnout of teachers or educators, any level, is about the same as first responders or people on the front lines of the medical profession. Okay, so it doesn't get any better at the universities. Yikes. Well, how about Peru? I mean, in Peru, you're allowed to have emotions. Peruvians are warm, happy people. Peruvians have close family ties and deep faith. It's got to be better here. Whoops. Here's an article, and this frankly scared me. This was, okay, now it's a few years back, 7 years back, by some psychologists, and they're applying the Maslow burnout inventory, which is the formal psychological test for burnout. Because these things can be measured clinically. Well, you can see the numbers. Okay, how much should we worry about this? Well, we all know that Arequipa is a foreign country because they have their own passports and their own currency. But still, they are Peruvians, right? And they are our brothers and sisters in the profession. What is alarming here is that public or private schools, male or female, almost everybody had a moderate level of burnout. Of course, 6 or 7% are severe, which means they need professional help. Notice again how we come back to the same definition. We circle around it, but it keeps coming up in the literature. Exhaustion, you're dragging yourself home. Cynicism, why do I bother doing this? Nobody cares. Students are horrible. Inefficiency, okay? Takes longer and longer to get things done. You know this when you're marking, right? There's a point at which you just have to quit because you've lost all perspective and it's taking too long. Okay. I was hoping things had got better since I did the original research. Disappointed again. I always go to the Mayo Clinic, that wonderful hospital in America, for my medical information. You go to their site and they tell you there's an index. It's so well organized. You can find any disease or disorder alphabetically. You can look at symptoms and see if you might have something or other. And it talks about treatment and prevention. It's a wonderful resource. Well, the Mayo Clinic has a burnout definition, and it's what we've been talking about. Physically, mentally, and emotionally exhausted. It's not just that you're tired, you're completely spent. And you might question your career choice and the value of your contribution to work. So it just doesn't seem to matter anymore. So it's difficult to compare professions. There's a wonderful and somewhat humorous, again, humoroscuro website in America called the Stress Institute. They have an institute for stress. It's got to tell you something. And they do all kinds of scientific research, but they will not compare professions because they say now everybody is stressed out. So there's no point. But generally, if you look at the literature, what you would see is something like this. Maybe half of the doctors you will see are burned out. That's not a good thing. Next time you go to a doctor, keep it in mind. Nurses, more or less the same. Social workers, more or less the same. And then we come to the teachers. At least 30% of us, maybe more. Again, you can look at the statistics depending on place, are in pretty serious trouble. And there's your school principal pretty much following up the teachers. Then we get to the lawyers and the police and so on and so on. It's interesting to consider why fast food workers would be in the top 10. And the reason I think is that they have no autonomy. And that's one of the things that we have to watch out for when we think about burnout. When you get to the point in which you think you have no choice, you're in trouble. Now, really, if you're a fast food provider, the customer is always right. Says he doesn't like his burger, he wanted it with one slice more cheese or cooked more, well, you have to do it again because your manager will always say he's right. This sounds like your school, I'm sorry. But, different professions have different levels of burnout and also different causes. But suffice it to say that teachers, all of us, are at risk, serious risk. Now, there is good news. I do not want to be the angel of doom and darkness, not to say death. I want to give you some good news and some strategies for coping. One ironic bit of good news, I guess, is that overwork and high technology have made everybody work more. Okay, so that, the 40-hour work week is now turned into the 50-hour work week. And it's very hard not to be at work, to separate work from the rest of your life. Now, the condition is cumulative. And here's where I want to think about hypothermia. I'll walk down. When I want to get personal, I come closer to you. Hypothermia is something I've thought a lot about only because I've lived in Canada. Cold weather is normal. I've also spent a lot of time in the mountains, and I've led wilderness excursions of different times. So the body is a funny thing. It has very low tolerances. You have maybe 3 degrees above normal in your body core. You have a fever, you're pretty sick. 5 is very dangerous. Likewise, if you have a few degrees lower than normal in your body core, you're in pretty serious distress. And if it goes below that, say 5 degrees, you're in real trouble. And if it goes lower than that, it could be fatal. The weird thing about hypothermia is this. You don't see it coming. You're not aware of it. It is like hypertension, the silent killer. So you're walking along, and of course you're in the mountains because you want to be in the mountains. It's a beautiful place. But there's a bit of rain, or it's a little cool. You get sweaty, you get cool, and you don't notice anything happening particularly. But if I was watching you, I would see, at one point, I might see that you were starting to stumble. You might even trip and fall. I might ask you if you're okay, and your words might be a bit slurred. Now, at that point, intervention is still pretty easy. You just stop, you peel off whatever wet clothes somebody has, you put on some dry clothes, you give them a shot of something sweet, and ideally you make a sweet cup of tea because you're in Canada after all, and bingo, everything changes. But you need the buddy. You need somebody watching you. And I've been on trips where I've seen young men, okay, just in the peak of health, okay, an 18-year-old, for example, walking along saying he's perfectly fine, even though he's stumbling, and even though when he falls over when he tries to climb a fence, because he has hypothermia. And you almost have to force him to have a sweet drink and get a fresh jacket. That's hypothermia. And you need the buddy system because you can't spot the effects yourself in time unless you're really careful. If you're really careful, you can stop and make yourself that hot cup of tea and change your shirt if you feel it's a bit wet and maybe ward it off. But you might not see it coming. Okay, so that's one of my metaphors for burnout. It's a bit like hypothermia. You don't necessarily see it coming. You just keep on going down the trail, which is the school year in our case. But if you have a buddy in particular, you can head it off. It's also good to know that you can assess the severity of your symptoms and you can remediate. Now, if you think about this, there is a kind of irony because as educators, we assess everything all the time. I mean, think about the number of things you assess. You assess your students' skills. You assess your students' knowledge. You assess your students' attitude. You assess their behavior. You write long reports at the end of the term explaining all this to their parents. And then when their parents come, you assess them too. And then you assess the outcome and you try to change things. But who's assessing us? How do we assess ourselves? Well, I'm going to give you a couple of tools that may help. One thing that does help, and this goes back to the idea of feeling that you have no power, is to decide that your purpose actually matters. The purpose of your work, which is your students, matters, whatever you feel. And to take control, to whatever extent you can, of your circumstances. And many things are out of our hands. You know, schools ask outrageous things, but some things are in our control. And to find some kind of balance or harmony as we go. Eventually, I hope we can shift our thinking from preventing or alleviating burnout to actually moving towards greater wellness, then leading wellness for ourselves and others. One thing which I should have said when I was talking about my own story, because when I wrote my book, I came up with what I call the immutable law of education. It sounds almost like Einstein. I really like it. The immutable law of education. What is the one thing that never changes no matter what school or university you teach in? And I've taught in North, South, and Central America. I've taught kids in grade 8. I've taught university students. I've taught in adult education. I've taught businessmen. What is the one thing that never changes? Well, you already know, but I'll say it anyway. The students always want more. The institution always wants more. The parents always want more. But there's only so much of you to go around. That's the brutal reality of our profession. It's also extremely ironic because people like you, and I might even include myself in this number, go into education for the noblest of motivations and the best of intentions. I mean, we don't go into education to hurt children. We go into education because we love children, we love our subjects, we want to bring that light to the world, we want to help people, we want to give from our heart and do something that really matters. Terrible irony is simply this: the people who are most like that, we're all like that as educators, are the ones who suffer the most. So the people who get burnt out or we'll say who are at most at risk of burnout are actually the best, in some sense, the best intended teachers. Even up into the university level, it's the same thing. Those who mean the best are most at risk because they spend themselves so easily for others. So we face overwhelming time-sensitive work when we get into our institutions. And who would have thought it would have been time-sensitive? I mean, we knew there was a lot of work going in, but how many deadlines did we imagine? It wasn't something I thought of when I thought of education. Ironically, and this is really humorous girl, one of the things that has made our job a lot harder is the thing that was supposed to make our job so much easier. Look at this picture carefully. And remind yourself never to believe the futurists. This comes, I think, from the Chicago World's Fair. I think it was about 1930, I'm not really sure. This is Mr. and Mrs. Future. This was sometime, going to be maybe sometime in the 1950s or 60s. The Brave New World, and look at them. They're having a wonderful time. They're coasting along. Well, we wish the traffic was like in Peru. The car is driving itself. They're just watching a little TV. They don't have very much to do. Having a nice little drink there. It's a beautiful world. But it didn't turn out that way. It turned out that technology is one of the things that makes our life more difficult. There are good things about technology, to be sure. I love it when I can Skype with my parents in Canada. It's like dropping over and saying hello. That's a big difference from a telephone call. The problem with technology is that there's just too much of it. And so what used to take an hour, if you were doing your reports by hand, might take 6 hours now because of all these computer programs that you have to learn how to use. And it never stops. Because as soon as you've learned one program, there's another one. And guess what? They're all going to make our life better. Do they? Yeah, maybe in some ways. They give management more data. Is that really an improvement? I don't know. You can push a button and erase a whole night's work. That's scary. I like the pen and pencil better. But anyway, technology is one of the things that's made our life more difficult. Another thing that has added to our difficulty as educators, or the stress we face, is the pace of curricular change. Now, apart from your particular connection with students, is a very personal and I would say artistic, even spiritual thing. Apart from that, the thing that's going to make the most difference in the classroom is curriculum. Absolutely. What you teach and how you teach is hugely important. I mean, I grew up in the days where we had to memorize multiplication tables. I have no idea why we had to do that, but we did it anyway. Now we're doing much more sophisticated things with our students, which is great. We're preparing them for a bright new world, but we have to keep up with every new change that comes along. Indeed, that's what this conference is about. And it's a great thing, but it adds stress to our lives. So my question to you is, how are you doing at the end of the day, or at this point in your career? And even more so, how would you know? Because as I said, we're experts. You, all of you, are experts at assessing everything that your students do and don't do. And you can find out a number, and you can use a rubric, and you can report it or record it. But how do we know, how do you know how you're doing? Well, I'm not sure I'd recommend the Lego pain assessment tool. No pain is a happy face. Worst pain possible is somebody who looks pretty angry. I think we could be more sophisticated. This is half a joke and half not. Because the question is actually not simple. How do you know if you're in danger of burnout? Or to put it more positively, how can you gauge your wellness? Because that would be the best way to look at things. Well, a very simple test. I call this taking your temperature, which I would like you to do now, is just go through this checklist. Okay? You should all have a piece of paper. And I just want you to look through these indicators. Now, I've developed this list over time, looking at many, many teachers and many, many classrooms and common rooms. But I've also compared it to the Mayo Clinic website checklist for burnout, and it's pretty close. I would say what this one has going for it is that it is tailored to teachers. So, if I can read this out to you, and you can just give yourself a check or not. Do you notice yourself sometimes or often having shallow breathing? Where you're breathing you have knotted muscles in your neck. Trouble. Okay, you don't have to raise your hands here. Okay, I'll go through it again. Shallow breathing, if people feel breathing from here rather than here, that's something that you can pay attention to. If people feel they have knots, that their muscles are very hard, especially here, trapezius, that's something to pay attention to, because we tend to store stress there. If we have frequent headaches, bit of a giveaway, we have too much on our minds. Stomach upset. Teachers, educators have a disproportionate amount of stomach upset. If I go in, if I'm a doctor and someone comes in with a stomach problem, probably half the time it's going to be a teacher. Or someone living in Lima. Requires medication or alcohol to relax. I'm not going to ask you to raise your hands, it would be embarrassing. But, I mean, think of those poor headmasters we were talking about. 1 in 6 were alcoholics. It's great to have a drink, okay? It's a beautiful thing. But if you go home, if you drag yourself home at the end of the day and you need that drink to keep going, maybe it's a bit of a problem. Do you find yourself short-tempered or irritable in class? If you just wish that kid would shut up and you can't take it anymore, then you go home and you yell at your wife, that could be a bit of a tip-off. Are you disappointed with yourself and your colleagues? Well, that's interesting, no? I mean, we all have self-doubt. We all know we're not the people we would like to be, but, you know, is that a persistent feeling? And do you keep thinking, well, I'm working my you-know-what off, and those other guys over there are just not doing their job? Are you disappointed with your colleagues all the time? Do you complain frequently about the institution? Well, complaining is kind of an art form, and teachers love it. And there's nothing wrong with it within bounds, no? In my book, I talk about different kinds of complaints. You know, the funny complaint, the dark complaint, the ordinary complaint. You know, there are a whole bunch of complaints. But do you complain all the time? Or do you know somebody who does? Do you arrive early in the morning? Do you stay late? You take work home with you? You work on the weekend? See people nodding. Give yourself a check or maybe an X if these things are true for you. Are you driven to meet deadlines? Do you feel that if you don't get something done on time, something terrible will happen? Feel someone driving you, forcing you? Probably your head of department or your head of school. Do you not plan your holidays in advance? I mean, this happens to me. My wife is talking to me about what are you going to do on the holidays. I'm too tired to listen. In the end, we don't do anything because by the time the holidays arrive, all the flights are booked and the hotels are booked. Right? Not a good plan. We all know that we should exercise and do things for fun, but do we actually find the time to do that? Have you laughed out loud recently at work? That's really interesting too, because that's a great indication. In the best schools that I worked at, there was laughter in the halls. The other day, I was at the university and I saw the photocopier, and someone had made a paper hat and put it on top of the photocopier. I guess they used one of the papers that nobody had claimed. They made a paper hat and they put it on top. And I thought that was a good indication that somebody had a sense of humor, right? That means there's a healthy work climate. Okay, so I'm not going to ask you how many you scored. I'm simply going to say this. If you found about 4 of those things applied to you, not a big deal. Found about 8 of them that applied to you, you should take measures. All of them apply to you, you should get professional help. Okay? The best response to this that I ever heard was from was in a very prominent private school here in Lima. And after we did this exercise, one of the teachers put up his hand and said, "Thank God, this means I'm normal." I thought, isn't that great, right? He realizes this is our state. This is how we are as teachers. Okay. But you want to keep track. You want to keep track because these things do change, and somebody needs to be responsible. Now, if you want to get into a clinical measure, we have the Maslach burnout inventory, which a psychologist would apply, or you can look at the Mayo Clinic website. But I think these things, a checklist would tell you a lot. But it's just an idea. Here's something more powerful. And I've done this with many groups, and it's brilliant in one sense. It invites you to look at your whole life. So if you have a piece of paper and a pencil, I would invite you to do this now to make the wheel of life. Okay, so what you have to do is draw a circle, and then you divide that in 3. Looks like the peace sign from the 60s. And then you divide each one of those 3 slices, if you like, into 3. Okay? So you end up with something that looks like that, with 9 pieces. 9 slices, if you like. Now, this is just the most common kind of version, if you like, of this exercise. I think it's very important that we do these things by hand, because as we use our hands, as we write, something goes off in our brain which doesn't happen with the computer. So once in a while, just take a page and make the circle or the wagon wheel, whatever you call it. Hands up if you have something that looks more or less like this. Yeah? Hands up. Okay. All right, good. The next part is to label the pieces. And the pieces are different parts of your life. The only rule is that only one piece can be your profession. Okay? So, profession, one piece. But then think of the other parts of your life. And that's why this is really valuable. One part might be finances, one part might be friends, one part might be place. You know, how do you like the place you live? One part could be family. When I was younger, I had one that was romance. Now I have one that says couple. Life changes, no? This is not a static thing. Once I had a piece that said adventure, then I moved to Peru, and I've gotten more adventure than I ever wanted in my life, just by living in Lima. But in all seriousness, the parts of your life that matter to you need to be represented here. Spirituality, okay? Whatever they are. And then, I want you to imagine a ladder, if you like, from 1 to 10 in each of these pieces. And so 1 would be in the middle, the center of the circle, and 10 would be at the outside. And I want you to rate your, not mine, not somebody else's, but your relative contentment. Not exactly happiness, but if I said, how are you doing with money? Well, none of us are doing tremendously because we're teachers after all. But still, you know, given the fact that they don't pay us enough, are we terribly unhappy, or have we accommodated to that fact? Or are we just okay with it, or what? How happy are you with your couple or your family? One of my pieces at one time, and still sometimes, is creative. Sometimes I find that I'm very happy with that part, and sometimes I feel not very much because I'm not doing anything that is really creative. That's okay. This is not cast in stone. It's just like a snapshot. It's a snapshot of you, or your life, if you like, and your relative contentment subjectively at that time. Everybody working hard. The great students. And this is particularly great after lunch. It's hard to think after lunch. Now, this is very private, so I'm not going to ask you to share it, but I am going to ask you to think about it. And I am going to recommend you to do this from time to time. Just see if you notice any changes. And of course, you can make adjustments. And it will change over time, and small incremental changes can make a big difference in the picture. But again, wouldn't go for perfect symmetry. So you need to be realistic, but you also need to be kind to yourself. We're not sculptures by Michelangelo. We're not angels. We're just people. Hey, we're educators. We're doing the best we can. At different times, might not have very much fun or recreation. Other times we might have a lot. Question is, how satisfied are you with the amount that you're getting at that moment? Probably okay to have career at 5 as long as you have some other things going on in your life. And that is the point. The mistake we often make as educators is thinking there's only one piece of the pie, and it's this one. Unless we're high performing in some way, which is mostly in our mind, we're not satisfied. That's very dangerous. Because really it's the rest of the things that sustain us. Now, because this is a pie chart of sorts, it does raise the idea of symmetry and therefore balance. Again, I'm not suggesting symmetry. In the first instance, I'm just suggesting reflection. Consider it a tool for reflection and do it from time to time. If I were to say to you the word balance, having just looked at the pie chart, what would come automatically to your mind? And this we could discuss. Why don't you just turn to your neighbor and discuss balance for a minute? If you had to define balance, what would it look like? What would it feel like? They just talk to each other for a minute. Pair and share, please. Not easy, no? Balance is extremely important. Half of the injuries that happen to old people are because they lose their balance. And often it's fatal. I mean, if someone who's old falls down, they break a hip, and after that, Doesn't get better. Balance. I was glad to see you talking and sharing your ideas. And again, this goes back to the buddy. Okay? The great thing about education in some ways is that you're not alone. There was a a poster in a staff room in a school that I was in that said, teaching is too difficult to do alone. And it was kind of funny because although it was true, in that school, everybody wanted to be a star. And so they were just on their own. But there were still some buddies to be found, and I found one. Okay, let me just go through some common images of balance. I wish we could have more of a conversation, but there is a language barrier. So if you'll forgive me, let's just go at it this way. And you can see if these make sense to you or not. And I'm going to give my own commentary. First of all, this doesn't make any sense. People talk about a work-life balance, and it's just fundamentally wrong, because your work is part of your life. It's not as if you have your life when you get home from work. You have your whole day and your work is part of it. So if you ever see one of these signs, knock it down. Spreadsheet. Well, that's kind of a funny one for us as educators. I mean, I suppose you could think about balance that way. But honestly, if you think about the number of hours we put in, the amount that we're paid for it, which is not much, the amount of energy and what we see, the change that we actually see in the lives of our students, it's not like this, okay? And if you do the math, you could be disappointed. I think it's too inhumane for our very human job. This is more fun. But again, it's this whole idea of symmetry. I don't think our lives are symmetrical. I don't think the lives of your students are symmetrical. So if we're talking about balance, I don't think it's an equation. And I don't think it's pi, even though I use pie charts. This is often what it feels like. Try to keep your balance, particularly at the most intense times of the term. And this is a very brave woman, and she's doing her very best, even wearing fashionable shoes, but full marks for intention, but it's precarious, it's risky, and she's up there all alone. And it shouldn't be that way. You shouldn't have to be alone. And it shouldn't be that risky, because if she takes one step to the wrong side, she's finished. So I'd say the tightrope is not quite what we want. This is more friendly. Did anybody have this image when I asked about balance? Anyone? Maybe it's a North American thing, I don't know. We have these teeter-totters all over the place, and kids sit on them. One goes up, one goes down. Sometimes there's a moment where they're absolutely even, but mostly one goes up and one goes down. And that's kind of the fun thing for them. But winners and losers is not a healthy way to think about balance. Because again, we're all in this together. Everybody in your staff room is dealing with burnout, and it's something you need to do it together. Here's a notion of balance. The scales are balanced. Maybe we think about this as educators when we're marking, because we want to be completely fair and completely impartial, and so we are, to the best of our ability. But if you think about it as a model of balance, it has two fatal flaws. One, the woman is blind. Okay, she's got a blindfold. And 2, she's got a sword. That's not a good combination for us, okay? Balance should not be blind or bloodthirsty. Got to be something else, I believe. This is the best analogy that I've been able to come up with myself. And this is partly because I'm a poet. It's partly because I do Tai Chi, so I've developed a bit of Taoist understanding of the world. But probably it's mostly because I grew up in rural Canada and spent a lot of time fishing and otherwise walking around streams. So I've looked at a lot of water very intently, and it's very interesting. So what you notice is that, of course, there are rapids, and there are undercurrents. There are some stones there which are making the white water. There are some things you don't want to run into if you're in a canoe, for example. But there's calm water behind this, and there's probably the calmest water here, and water maybe even going direction. So if I was trout fishing, I would put my fly here and over here. If I were canoeing, I would go down here. But the point is, our job is really to navigate through not troubled waters, at least constant change. So in your classroom, everything changes all the time. You can have the best lesson plan, the best assessments, the best everything. But when you walk into the classroom, you have to move. You have to adjust. You have to change. There are times in the year when things are just overwhelming, and there are times of the year where it's relatively easygoing. So I say balance is almost not the idea. It's more a matter of what people would call harmony. Making your peace with a constant flowing series of events, many of which are outside your control. The river is what it is. Your job is to get your students down the river without anybody drowning and to keep yourself in good health as you go. That's my idea of balance. Here are some simple strategies. We've got about 10 minutes left. Everybody is stressed, that's a given. And maybe if you use the checklist and the wheel of life, you can see how stressed you are. But everybody here also has checklists. I don't even have to ask you to put up your hands because all of you would. I have a checklist. Everybody has a checklist. We have 10 things we want to do in a day, but there's a certain problem. Halfway through our day, other things happen. And so we end up with 14 things that we want to do. And then other things just happen. You can see why this idea of keeping your balance in the midst of change is important. You know, a kid gets hurt on the playground and you have to phone home and take him to the nurse and everything, and all those other things you had hoped to complete don't get done. So, I've developed something which is a little shocking. I make my checklist and I put all the things that I can see that I need to do in the day for the university in the middle. You know, a sample of the kind of things that might be done in a school day. I think when I did this, I was a headmaster originally. But the point is, you have your 10 things you want to get done for the school or the university. But then you have the daring to put yourself first. I call this writing yourself into the to-do list. And it's very creepy when you first do it because you think, uh-oh, I'm not allowed to do this. I'm supposed to be thinking of my kids. What would happen if my principal saw this? Well, why not just try it? Write yourself in. Write one simple thing that you can do for yourself, or maybe two. I wouldn't say any more because it's too ambitious. And then, if you feel like it, something for somebody else. Of course, everything in your day is really for somebody else because you're dealing with children, but there might be somebody else that you know who's in special need of your care. And maybe just sending them an email would be a good thing to do. Now, here's the beautiful thing. Whatever happens, you only get probably 6 or at most 8 out of the 10 things done for the school. Because probably by the time the day is gone, there'll be several things added anyway. And however long you stay, however hard you work, you can never complete this list for the school. Because, to go back to the immutable law of education, the school always wants more, the children always want more, the parents always want more, but there's only so much of you to go around. So in some sense, what we need to do is redefine success. And my idea of a successful day is if I've done, say, 6 of those things, the ones that really had to get done for the school, 1 thing for me, and maybe 1 thing for somebody else. And I actually have the audacity to check off the thing for me. Even if it's only a 15-minute thing. I might be writing in my journal for 20 minutes. I might be walking across the street to the little park. Something small but manageable. So write yourself into the to-do list. Enjoy life's small pleasures, but do it in a purposeful way. I think in every class, staff room I've been in around the world, there have been many, there's always been a coffee pot that has been burning with terrible coffee. And I think, why can't we make ourselves a good cup of coffee? We're smart people. More to the point, why can't we take 15 minutes and go wherever we need to go to get a really good cup of coffee and just sit down and enjoy it? Enjoying the small pleasures of life really is one of the secrets to looking after yourself. You had a good lunch, I hope. You've already looked after yourself. I mentioned this before in terms of hypothermia, but I can't overestimate its value. Find a work buddy. Now, we often think of work buddies as people we share classes with, and it could be that. But I particularly would like you to find someone that you just get along with generally. And it was funny because I had buddies in other departments in my school. The people in the English department were like cats. They're all a little scratchy, not easy to deal with. But the guys in the phys ed department were fun and easy to get along with. So I used to talk to one of them from time to time. And it wasn't a matter of sharing classes or ideas so much as going for a walk together and just walking around. But somebody you can talk to as another human being. Find some kind of exercise you actually enjoy. Don't sign up at a gym if you actually hate lifting weights. There's no point. Tai Chi I highly recommend, but it doesn't really matter. It could be just going for a walk. Find something to divert yourself. This is a friend of mine from Canada. He loves to fish. He's a moderately successful professional, but he's the happiest man I know because he spends a lot of his time on the river fishing. Remember, please, that time, although it seems to be slipping through your fingers, is actually in your hands. You can't make it. There's only 24 hours in the day. But how you decide to handle it, I wouldn't say manage it, how you decide to think about it and how you decide to use it is really completely up to you. Time is in your hands. Here's a very easy one. Simply unplug, put away all electronic devices, and immerse yourself in nature for a few minutes, if it's all you can do. Half an hour if you're lucky, and wow, an hour if you're amazing. But walk into nature and let nature calm you. In Lima, it might just be going to a little park. It's great. Just go to a little park. Spend 5 minutes, smell the grass, look at the trees, be in nature. Remember that you have the best profession in the world, as you're helping people and you are illuminating their lives. You are enlightening them in a way that they will ripple on for the rest of their life. I have to end because of time, but I'll end 5 minutes left, but let me give you this benediction. This is really a blessing, and it comes from my book, but I mean it from my heart. Your calling is urgent and breathtaking. Think about that. Urgent and breathtaking. You carry the future in your hands every day. And I know I can take it for granted that you are armed with the latest pedagogy and information technology, of course. I know that you are ready to give everything to your students in selfless service. And God bless you for that. I simply want you to learn how to care for yourself better so that you can continue to care for your students as you would like to. Perhaps I'll leave it there for now. Thank you very much.
They are going to ask. Bueno, ¿alguna pregunta que tengan, por favor?
Justo conversaba con mi compañera. El tema del balance, creo que es importante que esté orientado al propósito, ¿no? O a un conjunto de cosas que quiera lograr. Porque conversábamos que si, por ejemplo, yo tengo como meta cuidar mi salud porque tengo un problema médico, no le voy a dar la misma cantidad de tiempo a mis amigos, de repente probablemente en esos 2 meses, ¿sí? Entonces no siempre la rueda va a estar perfecta, pero sí al final hacer un balance de aquellas cosas que me propuse y verlas en conjunto.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. What I'm talking about is a very dynamic process. No, it's going to change all the time. What you say about purpose is absolutely right. Okay, the main thing is your purpose. And when we lose our purpose as educators, that's the first sign of losing our balance, the first sign of burnout. But yeah, we're not going to have perfect lives. Things are going to change. Sometimes you're going to concentrate on one thing, sometimes the other. That's life. I think that's why the moving stream is so good. You know, because you can't control the stream. It has fast spots, then decides to slow down. Wow, you get rain, so suddenly you have a flood, or you have a drought and there's hardly any water. But we can find our way to keep, not balance, but keep sense, harmony in that constant flux. I think that's the idea. ¿Una pregunta más?
Bueno, yo felicito por la práctica del Tai Chi que usted desarrolla porque eso es una de las herramientas para tener salud y disfrutar de la vida también, ¿no? Eh, yo practico un poco meditación. Y eso es un tema también que me ha ayudado muchísimo para enfrentar los momentos de tensión, etcétera, etcétera, ¿no? Es, uno termina siendo más productivo, con mayor calma para tomar decisiones y etcétera, etcétera, ¿no? Eh, mm, por otro lado, creo que aquí hay un tema que podría ayudar muchísimo, es la cuestión de la neurociencia. Como somos, el cuerpo humano es todo un sistema integrado, uno tiene que ver con el otro, es interdependiente. Entonces, como dice, todo cambio genera estrés, eh, bueno o malo genera estrés. Entonces la cuestión va cómo es que nosotros nos manejamos y gestionamos todo eso para que no termine repercutiendo negativamente en nuestra salud, ¿no? Y hacer ese comentario. Gracias.
So much. Those are very insightful comments. Yeah, those are very insightful comments. There was a time when we used to think that there was stress and distress. So stress was good to a certain point, and then it got to be too much. What we know now through neuroscience is that even good things cause a degree of stress when they're new. So we need somehow to keep our balance, not in the way of perfect symmetry, but in the way of keeping our composure, finding harmony. I'm really glad that you meditate. I think that's a fabulous thing. When there are wellness programs provided by schools, and some do, they often include meditation, Tai Chi, and yoga. 1, 2, or 3 of those things. And I think it's because, as you say, we're integrated. Okay, mind, body, soul is integrated. And those things help us integrate. I think that's all we have for time, but I do want to say thank you for your attention and thank you for your reflections.
Bueno, damos por finalizada la conferencia, agradeciendo su asistencia y a nuestro ponente por su colaboración. A continuación habrá un receso un break de media hora. La próxima conferencia se dará a las 5. Esperamos que estén aquí, por favor. Gracias.